The animal I am now on the point of describing is the most singular and certainly the only powerful of the carnivorous and voracious tribe hitherto discovered in this austral part of the world. He was killed by some dogs belonging to the surgeon immediately contiguous to the settlement on a hill which I have named in the chart Mount Albany. It is very evident he is destructive and lives entirely on animal food, for on dissection I found the stomach was filled with a quantity of kangaroo weighing 5 pounds, and the weight of the whole animal was 45. From its internal structure, it must be a brute of peculiarly quick digestion, and the parts of generation, which I have preserved in spirits accompanying this, are of a most extraordinary formation. The form of the animal is that of the hyena, at the same time strongly reminding the observer of the appearance of a low wolf dog. The lips appear not to cover the tusks, the eye is remarkably large and black. The pouch in form nearly the same as that of the female kangaroo. On July 10, 1936, the government of Tasmania granted official legal protection to the thylacine, an endangered marsupial also known as the Tasmanian tiger. But by then, it was already too late. 59 days later, at Hobart Zoo on the island, it's said that a lone captive thylacine was left outside in its enclosure overnight and died of exposure to the cold. As far as anyone could tell, that thylacine had been an endling, the last known individual of its kind. The species achieved both official protection and unofficial extinction in the space of just 2 months. They had only numbered around 5,000 when European settlers arrived in Tasmania and first described them in that report we began with from 1805. And the conflict that ensued between those settlers and the thylacines is mostly to blame for the loss of the species, as people introduced new competition, modified their habitats, and sometimes actively tried to eradicate them. But the trade in thylacines for zoos, museums, and private collections also put a bounty on their heads, accelerating their journey into extinction. So we have to ask, when it comes to saving a species, what happens when our zoological fascination is actually part of the problem? Thylacines had already been going through a rough patch for thousands of years before European settlers showed up. They had once been widespread across mainland Australia and New Guinea as the biggest predatory marsupial to survive through the megafaunal extinction of the Pleistocene epoch. But around 3,000 years ago, they disappeared from those areas, probably due to competition with dingoes, dogs that were introduced by seafarers from Asia around this time. Despite thylacines being much more closely related to kangaroos than to dingoes, the two species had a remarkable amount in common, both in appearance and in ecology. The similarity of thylacines to wolves, dogs, and foxes is one of the most striking examples of convergent evolution on record. And it happened because they filled similar niches in their environments, developing matching solutions for the shared lifestyle of agile, opportunistic, mid-sized predator and scavenger. But that niche was not big enough for the both of them. Once the dingoes arrived around 4,000 years ago, thylacines began to vanish from the Australian mainland and New Guinea, pushed out by the new competition, and perhaps even directly killed by them. Though climate shifts and human activity may also have played a role, as they tend to do. Eventually, thylacines were left only on the island of Tasmania, which had been cut off from the mainland by rising sea levels around 12,000 years ago, long before the dingoes arrived. And seeing as the dingoes couldn't swim the distance, they simply never reached the island. So by the time European settlers arrived on the island, thylacines were already close to the brink of extinction. This was their last remaining refuge. Unfortunately, Tasmania was no longer safe. Settlers introduced new dogs and diseases like mange to the island, began heavily modifying the environment, and actively hunted thylacines, seeing them as pests that posed a threat to livestock. The last population of 5,000 that called the island home began to drop, and their persecution was even encouraged by the government of Tasmania at the time. A bounty system was established that paid out £1 for each adult killed and 10 shillings for each juvenile. More than 2,000 of these government bounties were collected over 20 years. Fear and hatred were mostly to blame for the loss of the thylacine. But there was another factor in play: fascination. When news of these animals reached the rest of the world, the Tasmanian tiger sounded like a zoological marvel. Its backstory seemed fantastical, the largest marsupial predator to survive into modern times, discovered living on a single island. And the reports that it was so dog-like, but also so not, just made it even more intriguing. These animals were clearly unique, and they had to be seen to be believed. The demand for thylacine specimens, alive or dead, skyrocketed from zoos, universities, museums, and naturalists who were eager to examine such strange and exotic animals up close and to show them off around the world. This demand came from a better place, perhaps, than the other bounties, often from scientific curiosity and a desire to understand this species. But the outcome was just as destructive. A thriving commercial trade in thylacines sprung up as hunters began capturing or killing thylacines to meet this demand, which sometimes offered much more money than the government bounties did. A couple hundred thylacines were caught and shipped around the world to zoos, menageries, and circuses, with many dying in transit. London Zoo alone exhibited a total of 20 thylacines over the years, and others found themselves on display at zoos in places like Berlin, Paris, Madras, Washington, D.C., and New York. And zoos were mostly unable to breed them in captivity. Even when breeding pairs were shipped as a couple, one would often die on the long voyage. Museums raced to add thylacines to their collections. Over 750 specimens can still be found in museums today, from skin and bones to whole preserved juveniles pickled in ethanol. This global trade in thylacines added yet more pressure on a species that was already fighting for its life in its own habitat. The scarcer the thylacines became as settlers continued to persecute them in Tasmania, the greater their zoological value grew. The final thylacine of the 20 that London Zoo acquired, and the last to be exported from Tasmania, was bought in 1926 for the enormous sum of £150, the equivalent of over $15,000 in today's money. And this reflected just how rare the species had become. Soon after, the trade dried up completely with the capture of a wild thylacine that would become infamous as the endling of the species. And while you might have heard that this endling was a male named Benjamin, that now looks like it may be both a myth and a case of mistaken identity. The male thylacine that appears in so many photos as the endling was never called Benjamin by his keepers at the zoo, though he did die of exposure in 1936, possibly in June. According to one team of researchers who published 20 years of work on this topic in 2023, there is another potential endling, an older female supposedly caught illegally in May of 1936. They claim that she died in September of 1936, which would make her the real endling. We may never know which version of the story is true. The record keeping of the time was not great, and the topic is still being actively debated. But what we can say is that calls for legal protection for the thylacine took too long and came too late. As far as we know, in practice, only a single individual ever actually had protected status, the real endling, whoever they were. In a sense, exposure may have ended the species in more ways than one. Today, zoos play a vital role in protecting species, often being directly involved in conservation work, like reintroduction initiatives, breeding programs, and projects to protect species in their natural habitats. Conservation is a central mission of all the best modern zoos around the world. But historically, in the case of the thylacine and other species, zoos played a very different role. They were places that only hastened extinction by prioritizing the entertainment value of strange and rare species at the expense of the stability of their wild populations. Our desire to see these unique animals for ourselves was part of the problem, and it only accelerated their demise. Zoos made the thylacine famous, but fame is the last thing it needed. The colonial powers of the 19th and 20th centuries were focused on cataloging, studying, and controlling the things they came across without considering the long-term effects this might have. Thylacines became just another exotic resource to exploit abroad and a problem to eradicate at home, as the landscape of Tasmania was reshaped by settlers. And we're still dealing with the consequences of those decisions, and with our desire to see a thylacine with our own eyes. Many naturalists, explorers, and hobbyists still desperately search for relic surviving populations that might theoretically have survived hidden in the remaining wild places of Tasmania. Numerous organized expeditions to find them were launched as early as 1937, but were never able to collect any definitive evidence of their continued existence. Though it's worth noting that recent research suggests that while it probably is extinct today, a few small populations likely did hold on a little while longer. For example, a 2023 study modeled the distribution of possible sightings that have been trickling in ever since the thylacines' supposed extinction, carefully dating them, mapping them out, and giving them a quality score. And the researchers' statistical analysis of over 1,200 such reports led them to conclude that the thylacine may have persisted in small numbers until the early 2000s. Unconfirmed sightings weren't enough, though, and in 1986, exactly 50 years since the last verified sighting, the death of the alleged endling at Hobart Zoo, the species was formally declared extinct. But people all over the world still want to believe that they may be out there, waiting to be rediscovered, a hope that against the odds, they may not yet be gone for good. But even if we did find a straggling survivor after all this time, what would we do with it? Put it in a zoo and count down the final days of this second endling? Maybe the lesson we should take from the story of the thylacine is something else entirely. Maybe the best thing we can do for a rare species is put our fascination aside and ensure that they have enough habitat, protection, and space so they're never exposed to us at all. Endlings is filmed in the Harry Plumley studio and was made possible by hundreds of you who supported our Kickstarter. Thank you so very much. We could not have done this without you. This week, we want to give a special shout out to Jerry L. Tolbert, MD. Thank you.